on behalf of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti, Assam, we all welcome you to this 11th Byakhyanmala of yearlong Bykhyan. And today we are happy to say that we have with us a prominent researcher and a nationalist writer who will be delivering on Hindu queen as temple builders in Bharatiya Parampara. Today also a special day, such lecture which made India as Vishwaguru, that Swami Vivekananda on 11 September. Today is also 11 September. So on this very special day, we are going to hear a special thought, and that is also a part of Gauravmay Itihas of Bharat. And as we know that this Byakhyanmala, the main shirshak is Gauravmay Itihas of Bharat. And today what we are going to hear is also one of the part of it. And such lecture we have already covered earlier. 6th lecture we have covered. Out of 24 lectures there will be, and after this also there will be book on the basis of these all deliberations. So today, prior to that, we'll go for 1 minute condolence for the departed soul, which has a very unfortunate incident occurred in Majuli when two boat collides. So for their departed soul, we'll just keep ourselves 1 minute silence. Om Shanti, Om Shanti. So again, with this condolence, now again we are happy to announce that we are today a prominent writer, columnist, a historian in true sense is with us. And she will be delivering on Hindu queen as temple builders in Bharatiya Parampara. So once again I welcome to this Byakhyanmala on behalf of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti Assam and Uttar Purba Khetra. And here with us, just I would like to introduce, we are having with us Dr. Nilanjan De, who is the Sampadak of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti Assam, and we have also executive member Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti Assam, Dr. Shashanko Shekhar Sharma from Dhubri, and Dr. Nilanjan De from Karimganj, and Kaushik Jyoti Bora is also there, and our prominent worker and my friend Mr. Lalji Sonariji is also there. We have with us Madhu Chanda Chakraborty. She is also a writer from Dhubri and now staying in Guwahati. And then we have Dr. Utpal Bora from Nagaon, and Biplab Dev from Karimganj. He is a secretary, Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti, Karimganj district. And of course, we are having with us Dr. Juri Sharma. She is the Saha Mahila Pramukh of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti. And of course, we are having with us Dr. Ankita Datta. She is also one of the member of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti, recently joined, and also she will moderate this session. With this, I would like to now request Dr. Ankita Datta to introduce Sumedha Verma Ojha ji.
Namaste. Namaste. সকলোকে মোৰ প্ৰণাম আৰু নমস্কাৰ জনাইছো সৰ্বপ্ৰথমে so আজি আমাৰ লগত Sumedha Verma Ojha ji আছে in today's Byakhyanmala series. Sumedha Verma Ojha, we all know her, author, columnist and speaker. I will briefly introduce her before she begins her wonderful and enlightening talk for today. She was born in Patna and she completed her schooling from Bihar and Jharkhand. She graduated in economics from Lady Shri Ram College and then post-graduated in sociology from the Delhi School of Economics under the University of Delhi. She then joined the Indian Civil Services in 1992, but she switched careers after a sabbatical in 2006, and since then she has been engaged in in-depth research work on ancient Indian history and Sanskrit and Prakrit works. She has researched and wrote a set of books in the Mauryan period based on the Arthashastra of Chanakya. Urnabhi, the name of the book, then expanded into a series of books on the Mauryan Empire. Sumedha ji works in the area of translating and explaining the epics and bringing ancient Sanskrit and Prakrit literature to the modern world, as also in the area of a gendered analysis of ancient India. She had translated a translation of the Sanskrit Valmiki Ramayan that was completed by her was published in the year 2016. She is also engaged in writing a book on the women of ancient India, which will set a new approach to understanding women based on the emic Shastric and Indic traditions of the subcontinent. She also works in the area of conservation of cultural heritage with a focus on the intangible heritage of oral traditions. The Los Angeles Library System has accredited her as an author and part of its South Asian outreach program. She recently contributed to formalizing an Indic approach to heritage conservation at the 4th International World Living Heritage Conference organized by the House of Mewar in Udaipur, Rajasthan. In India, the IGNCA, Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, the National Museum and other museums regularly invite her as an expert on talks related to Indian history and culture, and a paper is being published by the former in its Project Mosam anthology. The paper is being authored by her. She is a regular contributor of articles on history and culture in many newspapers and magazines and online portals, including Swarajya, Mind Makers, India Facts, Indian Express, Times of India, etc. She also works as a media consultant, providing inputs in ancient Indian history. Besides all of these, she wears many hats, and she also teaches courses on Indic sociology at the undergraduate level to bring the subject to a clearer understanding of the Indian society on its own terms. She is also the creator of the web series Maurya Lok, based on the Mauryan period of Bharatvarsha. As a former bureaucrat, she is also an international consultant with the United Nations organization, such as with different bodies of the United Nations organizations, such as the ILO, International Labour Organization, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and the GFTAM in the areas of finance, taxation, audit, and management. She currently lives with her husband near Geneva. Uh, some of her important books which have been published are the Urnabhi in 2014, published by Rowley Books, and the Ramayan, published in 2016 by Rowley Books. Her two most important forthcoming books include Urnabhi Book 2 and The Modern Women of Ancient India, to be published by Rowley Books. I welcome you, ma'am, to today's Byakhyanmala lecture session, and we are all awaiting to hear you. It's really a pleasure to have such a scholar today with all of us here, and the dais is yours, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. Namaste to everyone. Namaskar to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Thank you for the invitation to be part of the Bykhyanmala series for the Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti. It will be my pleasure to talk about Hindu women and Hindu women queens as temple builders in the Bharatiya Parampara. Let me start without any more introduction. Ankita has given a fairly long introduction of what I do, and I think all of you must have got an idea of the space in which I operate. And today's topic, today's lecture is very, very close to my heart, very, very close to the area in which I specialize. You must have heard gendered study of ancient India. So it is my belief, after an examination of the academics which is already available on women, that we need not just Sankalan of Itihas, we need Sanshodhan. We need a lot of revision, because the eyes through which all historical facts have been looked at have been, the viewpoint has been misplaced. Most of it has been the view of an outsider who has very little understanding of the real culture, the languages, the lives, the grassroots of this vast country that we live in. So, you know, basically what are we doing? In the 18th and 19th century, there was a set of books published which was called the Sacred Books of the East. So there were people like Max Muller and Bueller and Rhys David and a lot of other white men. So what we are doing today is basically following the legacy of those white men, further complicated by the fact that for the voice of women, it is not us, the women of India, who speak, but it is a small cabal of Marxist feminists who have taken over the entire space that the women of India, the indigenous voices of India, should have occupied. That space has been taken over by Marxist feminists. It is my life's work to bring the correct picture of women of the past and of the present in front of not only the world, but in front of our own country people, because all of us are also not aware of all these things. So it is, how are we going to do this revision? Let me explain at the outset how I'm going to go about it. So I'm going to talk about queens as temple builders. Before that, I will give you a background. If this is the Bharatiya Parampara, what is the Bharatiya Parampara of women and for women? And in this Bharatiya Parampara, how does temple building fit in? After that, I will give you some examples, real historical examples of queens who have been temple builders. All of us know the name of Ahilya Bai Holkar, because Ahilya Bai Holkar is closer to us in time than so many of the other forgotten queens, whose temples we may go to in different parts of the country. I will be talking about temples from all parts of the country. So we may go to those temples, but we are often not aware that it was a queen who had that temple built, or who had that sculpture installed, or who gave the money for which, through which that temple was standing for hundreds of years. Excuse me. So let me start with the background. If I say that Itihas needs not just Sankalan, but Sanshodhan, what do I mean? I mean that often the sources of evidence for history as they exist have not been properly appreciated, have not been properly even brought out. What are the sources of evidence when we want to look at the history of anything? Right now, we are looking at the history of queens. So what do we look at how do we understand what was happening 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. So the first thing is archaeological remains. Archaeological remains are very good evidence. The second is textual sources, whether they be scriptures, plays, inscriptions, etc. Inscriptions, of course, are in a special category of their own. So that is the third, epigraphical evidence. And for this topic of queens as builders, epigraphical evidence, that is the evidence of inscriptions on copper plates, on stone, on temple walls. These are a very, very important source of evidence. And last but not least is the folk tradition. And I think that if we have to look at Indian history as different from the historiography of the West, we must remember something very important. We are a continuous living civilization. The methods which apply to, say, for example, the Egyptians will not apply to us, because we are a continuous living civilization. Each of us, when you look at us, we are the embodiment of thousands of years. You know, the dress we wear, the jewelry we wear, what we eat, how we speak, all of it is the embodiment of a very long millennium of culture. And that culture is something which informs everything that we do even today. So that cannot be discounted as a source. Therefore, we need to have certain new historiographical methods which appreciate the evidence sources in a new way. And that is what I try to do in my work whenever I'm researching anything, be it the women of the past, be it the political theory of the Saptang state of the past, which is what I have made the web series on. So it is a reappreciation, reanalysis of evidence. That is what I'm trying to do. What is my problem with the way in which the story of women has been framed? The way in which it has been looked at, like I said, it is overwhelmingly the Marxist feminist framework. Now, the Marxist feminist framework is good for many things, not necessarily good for the way it looks at women. Why is that so? Because it is what is called a conflict theory. At the basis of Marxist feminist theory is the idea that men is a group which is different, women is a group which is different, and they're always fighting, always in conflict. So, men dominate women. Today, women have to get up and start fighting with men, so then they can dominate men. It is conflict theory, whereas the base of Indic civilization is not conflict, it is cooperation, it is harmony, it is living in peace. So at the very outset, the eyes through which we look at our own culture become something which are not those are not the appropriate ways in which to analyze either our texts or inscriptions or history or any of the other evidences that we take into account. Then what is? We cannot merely stop at saying, no, we won't do this. You can't just reject things and not do something positive. So what is it that we need to use when we want to look at women? I submit, and this is what I am working at along with a number of other people, I submit that the way in which we should look at Indic civilization, be it the question of women, be it the question of anything else, is the Varnashram Dharma and the Purusharth framework. All of us should be aware of what this is. Of course, Varna, which is wrongly translated as caste, there is not an Indian who would not be aware of this word. There is not anybody living outside India who thinks of India and does not know the word caste. So caste has been conflated with Indians, with Hindu Dharma. So we know a lot about caste, but is that all correct? A lot of fresh work on caste is also needed, but that is a separate story. What I will say here in short is that a refreshed and updated understanding of Varna along with ashram. So all of us know the ashram theory, that there are 4 ashrams in life. We start with brahmacharya, go on to grihasti, and then to vanprasth, and then to sannyas. These are the 4 ashrams of any human being. And the last is purusharth, dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. So there has to be a balance. between the pursuit of dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. This is what Indic civilization is all about. This is the way in which we have to approach any question. And I will explain to you and illustrate to you how I am putting this framework to use when I look at the question of queens who built temples. Now, before that, we have to also look at a very important objection, which is filed against this kind of viewpoint. When I say that you have to look at Indian society through the ashrams, through varnashram, and through the purusharths, there will be an objection that all these ideas were made for men, by men, and women had no access to all the positive, self-realizing work or attitudes that were there in society. They were merely tools for men to achieve their goals of ashram or for men to achieve purusharths. They were merely things. They had no, they were not subjects, they had no agency. So what is the point of thinking of any framework when that framework was not available to women? Now that is the objection which is raised by most often by Marxist feminists, who always talk about lack of agency within the, now you know this word also really very well, patriarchal system which existed in India, both in the past and in the present. So what is this patriarchal system? They have, of course, borrowed the word patriarchy completely from Western Christian concept and from its Roman and Greek roots and transposed it onto the Indian system. I will have to keep things short, so I cannot go into detail, but let me just tell you that the Varnashram system and the four Purusharths were available to women. There is a lot of evidence if you read the Dharma Shastras. Some of our rishis who have written the Dharma Shastra, for example, if you look at Gautam Rishi, or if you look at some of the commentaries of Yagyavalkya, even some of the commentaries on Manu, if you look at Kautilya, there is clear evidence to show that the four ashrams were as much available to women, and the four purusharths, as in they had to work hard to achieve their dharma, arth, kam, moksha, those were equally applicable to women. So if we need some evidence, we just need to look at, for example, look at brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is the time when the young person studies. So were women educated in ancient India? There is ample evidence to show that not only in ancient India, but up till very late, women's education in India was excellent. And it has only been, say, in the past 150 years, 200 years that things became a little bad. And that too, how bad they became is a matter of understanding, because sometimes many things are exaggerated and some of the positives are left out to paint a very dark and black picture. The picture may not be that black. To go back to certain evidences. So, when we want to give examples from ancient society, it's always good to go back to the epics. It's always good to go back to itihas. Itihas is what? Mahabharata and Ramayana. They are referred to as itihas. And then we have our Puran. So we have the itihas Puran tradition to look back at for a history of our own society. So look at Mahabharata, just off the cuff, I can remember Sulabha. Maybe all of you will remember the dialogue that Sulabha had with Raja Janak. Who was Sulabha? She was a wandering intellectual. She was a Kshatriya woman who had decided to give up everything and become a wandering ascetic and become an intellectual and a rishi. And you have just to read her dialogue with Raja Janak, who was one of the major intellectuals of his time, to understand the level to which she had reached. So I'm just giving you one example. There are so many. We have all heard of Gargi, and we have all heard of Katyayani, and we have heard of the dialogue between Yagyavalkya and his two wives. So we know all this, but somehow we don't put it in place. This is just an example to show that brahmacharya, for instance, was available to women also, as was sannyas. So there is the famous example of the daughter of Yayati, Madhavi, who had a very adventurous life, and that's a story in itself. But at the end of it all, when still very young, when her father wanted her to get married, she said, "No, I will not marry. I will become an ascetic." So the Swayamvar mala, instead of putting it in the over the neck of any of the kings who had come to woo her, she threw it in the forest. And she said, "I wed the forest. I'm going to go and live in the forest and become an ascetic." And then she attained a lot of knowledge. She attained a lot of punya. And there is a story about how that punya worked for King Yayati when he actually needed some help to stay in Swarg. But again, these are long stories. I can't go into all of them. My point being that there is ample evidence in our own history to show that the ashram system and as well as the four purusharths were equally available to women. Where and how did they actually work for this? So we have to go back to the ashram system. There were 4 ashrams, but the main ashram was Grihasti, because Grihasti was the one where all kinds of surplus was produced. People got married, they had children. So remember, those were the days when we needed more people. We didn't live in an overpopulated country or overpopulated planet. We needed more people. So Grihasti was where the future society came from. Grihasti was where economic surplus was created. So Grihasti was the linchpin around which all of society revolved. So some of our, Shastric experts, some of our Shastra gurus have also called it Ekashramya. They don't believe in these 4 ashrams. They say there is only one, Ekashramya, which is Grihasti. And in that Grihasti, the Patni, the Pati, and the progeny are one unit. Now, I will come back to, remember this, keep this in your mind. What is Grihasti? Now we will go back to what is patriarchy. Patriarchy has been tried to be conflated with the concept of Griha, Grihapati, Grihapatni, and Grihasti. So the idea is that just as in patriarchy, the patriarch, the head of the family, was a man, and everyone else, everything else, all assets, all people were owned by him. Same was true of the Griha. And the Grihapati was the patriarch. Now, even a simple reading of any of the Dharma Shastras will tell you that this is not true. Because in a Grihasti, it was not just the Grihapati who was important. What was the unit? There was a unit of the Grihapati and the Grihapatni and the progeny. It was not one person, but it was one unit, which included man, woman, progeny. Now there is I will just have to go into a little bit of detail. There is a legal concept in Latin, Roman, Greek, and Western tradition, which is called coverture. What does this coverture mean? That once a man gets married to a woman, the woman simply disappears, does not exist any longer. The man covers the woman completely. That is called coverture. Therefore, they become one person. Therefore, the woman has no existence, has no legal, political, or social rights at all. All of them are subsumed in the man. Now, this legal concept of coverture does not exist in Hindu law. Whether you take Mitakshar, whether you take Dayabhag, whether you take anyone, pick up any Dharma Shastra and read the legal provisions. This concept of coverture, this concept of the legal disappearance of women does not exist in Hindu Shastric thought. So this is just one example to tell you. I mean, I'm hoping to write more on the subject of the wrong conflation of the patriarchal family with Grihasti, Grihapatni, and Grihapati. But this was just an example to tell you how different the rules that govern the Grihasti and the rules that govern a patriarchal setup are very, very different. In a Grihasti, the Grihapati and the Grihapatni have their own roles. They are both like 2 wheels of a chariot. They both have to move together. It's not that the chariot now has only one wheel, which is the man, which is what the principle of coverture says. There are always 2 wheels. You remember that Sri Ram could not conduct the yajna without his wife. He did not want to marry again, so he had a golden image of Sita ji made. It shows you the importance. It is just not possible to do anything without being a grihast. Either you renounce everything and you become a sannyasi, which means that you have kind of renounced society. People don't do that. If you are living in society, you have to be a grihast. Otherwise, you cannot do your ritual duties. You are not really a person in the Vedic sense. And for that grihasti to exist, the husband and the wife, the grihapati and the grihapatni, both have to be together. Now let us connect it up with today's topic, the grihapatni, living in a grihasti. Let's transpose it to the royal household. In any household, what was the role of the grihapatni? There were many roles, but I will talk of a specific one today, which was allocation of resources for charity and for, for the greater societal good. She was the one who allocated the resources within the household for food, security, protection, etc. And that very important part of charity and religious works. This was done by the grihapatni. In the royal household, the queen was the grihapatni. And there would not be only just one queen, there would be multiple queens. Their status would differ according to certain circumstances. Sometimes the queen mother was equally important, and she would be more important than the queen. If we, I will just give you an example of the Arthashastra, which deals with the household of the king in great detail. That is another of my areas of interest and research. So the queen mother and the queen were part of the inner council of the king. That means they were the ones who gave him the most important advice on what he had to do. They also had, they were in the Arthashastra framework, and that is the kind of Mauryan framework. They were very important officials of the kingdom because they also helped in deciding policy. And that policy would be in relation to everything. In the context of today's talk, that policy is also, charity, religion, who to donate to, who to give what, where should temples be made, etc. All these things were also decided by queens. So we can now see that there is a certain framework within the grihapatni, and I will now call her the queen, has a lot of influence on what happens in the kingdom, what is done in the kingdom, and how its resources are used. And I have connected it up to the concept of the grihasti, to the varnashram dharma, and to the 4 purusharths. So in contributing to making of temples, in contributing to charity, contributing to maybe ashrams, etc., all these were to gain credit. So remember, earth was there and it was used in a dharmic way to achieve moksha and to live an ideal life, because all this was also part of the ideal life of any individual. If you read the Dharma Shastras and see what are the duties of an individual, charity, even for the poorest person, whatever little he can give, not necessarily that you have to give a lot, whatever little you can give, that charity is part of being a person who follows the Shastras and who is a good individual in the Vedic view of life, which is because I am mostly going to look at ancient India today, and that was the way of life that they followed. This was a very important component. Now, okay, so we know that these grihapatnis were capable of deciding who to give the money to, etc. But what about the actual building of temples? The actual architecture, the sculpture, the statues, the design. How would they know? How would they know anything about this? Why should they know anything about this? For that, then, it is, we have to go back to education of women, education of queens. How were they educated? So again, I can't go into all details, but I will give you another concept over here, which is the concept of the Chatushashti Kala, the 64 arts. So the royal ladies, and not just the royal ladies, often even the high-ranking courtiers or the rich Sethis, the rich merchants, or anyone who could, to whatever extent they could, were all trained in the 64 arts. It was essential for the king and the queen and the royal household to be trained in the 64 arts. Now, what were the 64 arts? The 64 arts are a very fascinating combination of almost all the things that we can think of around us in normal daily life. So as you can imagine, dancing, singing, painting, all these things were part of the 64 arts. Also, architecture, sculpture, vastu, these were also part of the 64 arts. So our royal queens were very well trained in all these things and were able to design temples. They were able to design statues along with the sculptors. I'm going to, as we go on, give you the example of the Hoysala Queen Shantala. You must have heard the story of how she took special interest in designing the statues in the Hoysaleshwar temple, which still exists in Halebid. And that temple has certain images which are said to be of Shantala herself. To help the sculptor, she actually posed. She was a very renowned dancer, a very expert dancer. So she posed for many of the, and you can today, if you want, you can go to Halebid and go and see those. She posed in different dance, poses for the sculptor to make those and make them out in stone, and they are present in the temple at the moment. So this is the level to which they could get involved. Shantala was a very exceptional queen. She was a renowned artist, dancer. She was a very learned woman. She was a great administrator. So these were the kind of women, these were the kind of queens who we are going to talk about now and whose examples we are going to see. So this was the background. And now I am going to give you some examples of actual temples. But before that, I don't know, Ankita, if anyone would like to ask any question or if they have anything, it would be good to maybe take a break the lecture at this time. And if anyone has any questions, I would be very happy to answer them. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, madam.
Yes.
In Mahabharata, these 64 Vidya, arts are also mentioned. So it is all along in all the, Bharatiya Parampara, it is there.
Certainly, absolutely. And you think of Arjun. See, he taught dance to Uttara. He was a dance teacher. So obviously, apart from being a warrior and being taught all the martial arts, he also had learned things like dancing, singing, painting, etc. Look at Bhim. He was an expert cook. That is also one of the 64 arts. Look at Raja Nal of Nal Damayanti fame. He was a famous cook. So both men and women learned the 64 arts. And you are very right about the sources of these 64 arts. We find them everywhere in our Itihas Puran tradition. And normally with each art is associated its Shastra. So for example, for painting, you have the Chitra Sutra. Or for sculpture, you have the Vastu Kala Upanishad. Then also you have the Vishnu Dharmottar Puran. So for each of these, you have a huge amount of lore behind it, huge amount of learning behind it. So you're right about the very extensive sources that we have for the 64 arts. I have done a little bit of work in the area of 64 arts and writing down all their names and what they were. And if anyone is interested, I can send it later. So 64 arts were something that everyone knew. And in those 64 arts was all the information you would need in today's topic, that is in building a temple. Does anyone else have any question, or shall I just move on now to examples?
Ma'am, I think you can move on.
Okay. So I am going to see the whole list of the number of queens who have made temples is a very long one. Also, many of the temples which had been made by them, we now know only because of inscriptions, because someone wrote it down, because we have a long history of temple destruction. Apart from that, there is also, the depredations of time. Apart from that, there were also other temples who were built on top of these temples. So because of all these reasons, the list is long, and sometimes we have trouble in locating which temple exactly was it. But then there are some very famous temples which stand very proudly today, and they are associated with certain queens as their builders. I will try to give some selected examples and some selected lists, and maybe 2 or 3 images of some of the more important temples. So let us start with the 3rd or 4th century, which is the Ikshvakus of Andhra country. So it is said that the Ikshvaku queen Chamti Siri had a temple made at Nagarjun Konda. Now all of us know that Nagarjun Konda is a very famous Buddhist center. But in that Buddhist center, there were also temples which were made by Chamti Siri and also her sister. Her name was Bodhisiri, Upasik Bodhisiri. This brings out another fact that I must emphasize here, and that you will see in each of the examples I give. Hindu temples, Buddhist and Jain temples all existed together. Now the same queen, this Chamti Siri, did not only have apsidal temples made, she also had chaityas and vihars made for Buddhist monks. So you see, these queens gave to all sects of these Indic religions, and that kind of hard division that this is Hindu and this is Buddhist and this is Jain, which we seem to subscribe to nowadays, did not exist. And even up to very late periods, in maybe even the 10th, 12th, 13th, 14th century, you have queens who were donating to all kinds of temples, Hindu, Buddhist, as well as Jain. I'm just going to give you some names. I'm just going to give you the names of certain temples or certain areas and 1 or 2 examples, because otherwise it's not possible. We'll be here till tomorrow. If we go on a little later, this is now in the 8th century, the Chalukyas of Vatapi. The Chalukyas of Vatapi, you know that the Virupaksh temple at Pattadakal. So at the Virupaksh temple, it was originally called the Lokeshwar temple. And why was it called the Lokeshwar temple? Because it was built by Loka Mahadevi. She was a chief queen of Vikramaditya II. And she had this temple made, this Virupaksh temple, to commemorate her husband's victory over the Pallav king Nandi Varman II. Now let me show you a picture of the Virupaksh temple. Just give me a minute. Are you able to see it yet?
Yeah, it is coming.
Yes. Can you see the picture now of the Virupaksh temple?
Yes.
So there is, and you can see from here, there is another one, another Mallikarjun temple in Pattadakal, which was also built by another queen. And that queen was Trilok Mahadevi. It is as exquisite as the Virupaksh temple. So you see, I am showing you pictures of 2 of the temples which were built by the queens of the Chalukya dynasty. So I showed you the picture of the Mallikarjun temple, and Trailokya Mahadevi and Loka Mahadevi were sisters, which brings me to another point that I would like to emphasize is that many times these things went in families. So sisters, aunts, daughters, cousins, nephews, all of them were actuated by the same desire, and maybe that talent of designing, that talent of making sculptures, and that devotion to God also ran in families. So many of the times you will see that these temples are all contributed to by members of the same family. Then you also have, the Chalukyas of Vengi, which is again in the 8th century. So there is a lady called a queen called Ayyan Mahadevi. So she gave a grant in favor of a temple, a Jain temple at Vijayawada. And what happened after 100 years? She did this in around 615, 633 AD. In 762 AD was the reign of King Vishnuvardhan III. He was the son of Vishnuvardhan II, that Hoysala king. So her grant was renewed by this king. So you see that this did not happen in some kind of discreet or cut up kind of way that one queen did this and then finished. The ones who came after her kept up the grant. They kept up the continuity of that grant. So that queen, Ayyan Mahadevi, she may have given some gift or she may have made something which would have lasted about 100 years. And when that started running out, then the current king gave another grant so that that temple could be maintained. You can see the continuity, the piousness, the importance that was granted to given to temples, and it was not as if somebody else has made that temple, now it is in ruins, okay, let it be, doesn't matter. That was not the attitude, and that is also a very interesting and important thing. Other than the Chalukyas of Vengi, then you have the Rashtrakutas, then you have the Chalukyas of Kalyan, you have the Gangas of Talkad. Now all these are again mixed Hindu and Jain temples. Now I'm going to come to a very, very interesting dynasty which I'm going to also write about. Have you heard of the Bhaumkaras of Odisha? Now the Bhaumkaras of Odisha were a very different kind of reigning family where the queenship went from one queen to another queen. There were 6 important queens in the Bhaumkara dynasty. They all ruled Bhuvaneshwar and around, and they made a number of temples. So there was Tribhuvan Mahadevi the first, Tribhuvan Mahadevi the second, Gauri Mahadevi, Dandi Mahadevi, Vakul Mahadevi, Dharma Mahadevi, and all these were queens in their own right. And they, according to inscriptions that we can study today, they contributed to a number of temples. It is like I told you, sometimes it is not possible to look at exactly which temple was made by which particular person, because a lot of water has gone under the bridge. But all these queens made a number of temples and they gave grants to a number of temples. Now I'll tell you a very interesting thing about Tribhuvan Mahadevi II. A woman, a common woman, not a queen, not a courtier, nothing, just a plain common woman, came and asked her that I want to build a temple for my husband. So she gave that woman money so that that common woman could build 2 temples for her husband. So this is the extent to which temple building by queens, they did not build it just themselves. They helped other people also to build temples. So this is the Bhaumkara dynasty, the 6 queens of the Bhaumkara dynasty, and the number of temples built by them, the number of grants given by them are a special case in the area of, when we study queens who have built temples. There was also, there is a very important Madhaveshwar temple, Madhaveshwar Dev temple in Viraj in Odisha. This was built by the queen of Shubhakar Dev. Her name was Madhav Devi. So those who were queens in their own right, who ruled as the sovereign, they built temples. Those who were wives of ruling sovereigns, I have told you what the role they had in the royal household. They also built temples, and they also gave grants, and they achieved their ideas of piousness, charity, of achieving moksha in this life through their grants to temples. And it was a very important part of the mental space of royalty and of royal queens. Then, you also have, there are some of these dynasties which are quite vague. I mean, we know very little about them. For example, the Santaras of Pattipom Bulachpur. They are a very, very small and obscure kind of dynasty, but they built a lot of Jain temples. And those are, again, we know of them through various inscriptions. Then we'll come to the Hoysalas. I've spoken to you about Vishnuvardhan's wife, Shantala Devi. Now, I wonder whether all of you have read that wonderful 4-volume book called Shantala in Kannada. I have read it in a translation, but it gives the life of Queen Shantala in great detail. So she was a very accomplished woman, as I told you. And her husband, Vishnuvardhan, she was a Jain lady. And she was a Jain common lady. She got married to the prince Vishnuvardhan. After the marriage, many years after the marriage, Vishnuvardhan came under the influence, so they say, of Adi Shankaracharya and became a Hindu. So she was a Jain lady, but she contributed tremendously to the making of all the temples. It is said that in open court, the king Vishnuvardhan and his Jain queen Shantala Devi gave a huge grant for the building of a Shiva temple. Now let me show you a picture. I want to show you a picture of what is said to be Shantala. Can you see this?
Yes.
This is a dancing. This is a dancing girl in a dance pose, and this is from Bellur in Karnataka, and this is said to be Queen Shantala herself, because she was a fabulous dancer, and to make these beautiful images which decorated the temples, the two sculptors, Chakkan and Dakkan, they needed a model. So she is said to have modeled for the sculptors herself, the queen. Remember, she was a Jain queen. Her husband became a Hindu. In fact, Shantala is a quite, she's an amazing woman. She was the chief queen of Vishnuvardhan. She had 2 sons. Then he married another young woman on the Adi Shankaracharya is said to have asked him to marry someone else. Then he had a son through that queen, and Shantala and her 2 sons stood aside, let that other son become the person who inherited the kingdom. And in fact, her 2 sons always stood as the most trustworthy senapatis of their younger brother. This was what she had taught them. So this is again, speaking of the importance of women. So the way in which we have been told to understand royal households, that everyone was always fighting with each other and everyone wanted this and wanted that. Shantala is a complete example of something different. She is, of course, a great example of what we are discussing today, of queens building temples and sculptures and giving grants, etc. So she is, her life, the study of her life is like a role model for women, how to be effective and how to be noble. She is the ultimate example of a noble queen, a Jain queen who has contributed to making some of perhaps the most beautiful Hindu temples in the country. So, apart from the Hoysalas, there was also the Kakatiyas, Rudramma Devi. I hope I don't have to tell you the story of Rudramma Devi, who was brought up as a son by her father. Then finally, it was discovered that she was a girl, so then she became a queen. and she ruled as a queen herself. And Rudramma Devi again is a study of queenship, in India. And in the book that I'm writing, The Modern Women of Ancient India, I hope to do a great, in-depth study of Shantala as well as of Rudramma Devi. So she was also a very important temple builder and a giver of grants for temples. Now we come to the Pallavas of Kanchi. Now, who doesn't know about the Pallavas of Kanchi? They are because of the temple that they made, the Kailasnath temple at Kanchipuram. They are unforgettable in the temple tradition. So I want to show you, the Kailasnath temple was made by Narasimha Varman II in the 7th century or the 8th century. But his chief wife, Rangapataka, she built an independent shrine at Kailasnath. And another queen of his also built an independent shrine next to the main Kailasnath temple. Let me show you the temple built by So you see this temple. This is a little shrine which was built by Rangapataka, the chief queen of Narasimha Varman II, and it is an independent dedicatory shrine built in the same Kailasnath temple whole complex. And as I said, there is another one which is also built by another queen of Narasimha Varman II. So in this, we all of us know the Kailasnath temple at Kanchipuram very well. But then we have not emphasized or understood the fact that within that temple, which was built by Narasimha Varman, there was such a contribution of his wives, of the queens, who built independent shrines because they wanted to do something by themselves. And now, after the Pallavas of Kanchi, I will come to perhaps the most glorious temple builders of India and the most glorious tradition of queens and royal household women contributing to temple building, that is the Cholas. They are unmatched. Perhaps, I may go on and on a bit because I am a great admirer of the Cholas, of Sembhya Mahadevi, of Kundavai, of Rajaraja Chola, of Rajendra Chola. They are my role models. So forgive me if I am too enthusiastic. But the Cholas are perhaps, they had a family which was artistic. So you will see that there were a great number of women who contributed to it, and the list is so long that I don't know how to actually tell you the names of all of them. The list is really, really huge. These 3 pages, I have 3-4 pages, and this is just a list of the temples that were built by Sembhya Mahadevi, by Kundavai, by Loka Mahadevi. But let me approach it in some kind of order. So the first person we will consider is Sembhya Mahadevi. She was the wife of Gandharaditya. He was the third after the establishment of the Chola Empire. He was the third king. He ascended the throne in 953 and died in 949. It was a very short reign. Now, Sembhya Mahadevi was married to him around that time. The first time that her name appears in any inscription is in 941. The last time her name appears in any inscription is 1001. So she was active for 60 years. For 60 years. And what was her life like? Her life was a complete negation of whatever is understood of the life of women in ancient India. She started contributing to temples even before her husband became king, when she was just the wife of a prince. Gandhar Aditya became a king in 955, but we see inscriptions of 941 in which she is giving grants to temples, etc. She was the queen for about 8 years. Then Gandhar Aditya died. After that, there was a bit of a disturbed phase where there was some internal jostling about who's going to become the king, etc., etc. But whoever became the king, whether it be Uttam Chola or anyone else, she was held in very high esteem. And this entire period between 941 and 1001, she went on doing, giving her contribution. What were her contributions? She made new temples. I'll give you a list of those temples. She renovated old brick temples into stone ones. And also, whatever inscription was there on the brick temples, she had them transposed onto the stone temples so as not to lose the history of that temple, the history of that dynasty, of that period. Can you understand the kind of dedication and the kind of historical understanding that is needed for this? She also renovated old temples. She gave gifts to temples so that they could be they could run properly. She also added statues, and she had some very beautiful statues made. She was the aunt, the great aunt of Rajaraja Chola. So her great nephew was Rajaraja Chola, this was the apogee of the Chola Empire, and he was a great admirer of his great aunt. There are inscriptions to the effect that she is allowed to give directions in his name. So she gave directions in the name of Rajaraja Chola. That was the kind of respect she was held in. And remember that after 949 till 1001, she was a widow. So according to the received understanding about Indian women and Indian queens, either she should have become a sati or she should have been exploited and humiliated and hurt by her relatives. But no, she was at the apogee of the kingdom. She was building temples, she was giving grants, and she was respected and revered by everyone. Now, there is something I want to tell you about Srimdya Mahadevi, which perhaps is something which is really ignored. So there is a statue of Nataraj. All of us know that statue of Nataraj. It is also very famous because at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, which is just near where I live, on the Swiss-French border, there is one statue which represents the movement. It is said to represent physics. What is that statue? It is a statue of Nataraj. Who was the one who conceptualized that bronze statue? Srimdya Mahadevi. So let me show you two images. I'm going to show you two images. To take a look at this, can you see the Nataraj? The Nataraj is dressed in traditional South Indian decoration, and there is a pujari in front of the Nataraj. So take a look at it. Look at it very carefully. Look at the elements. It is standing on Mara. The hair is like this because Nataraj is dancing. There is that particular dance pose, the Nataraj pose. And now, if you have taken a look at this, let's see. If you've taken a look at this, I will show you another image. Can you see this? This is the same Nataraj, and I mean the same style of Nataraj. And this is the one which is in front of CERN at the Swiss-French border. So this was the lady who was learned enough, artistic enough, rich enough, resourceful enough to conceptualize and popularize this Nataraj, which has now become internationally famous. Now, there is a lost wax method of bronze casting. It is not a new method. It has been there since the age of the Harappans. However, the Cholas took it to a new height, and it was Shimbya Mahadevi who was instrumental in that. She had the idea of designing and getting these bronze statues made. She popularized a whole set of portraits and sculptures. So, I wish I had more time. I would have shown you a portrait in bronze of what is said to be Shimbya Mahadevi herself. But okay, we can't do all that because I still have to tell you about Prabhavati Gupta and there's not much time left. So you see, one of the Chola queens, that is Shimbya Mahadevi, was so exceptional as far as making temples is concerned. And just to give you a taste, there are at least 10 new temples that she had made, at least 3 to 5 temples which she renovated, and the list of gifts that she gave to temples are too many to elaborate. Now, there was another Chola queen. Her name was Kundavai. She was again the grand niece of Shimbya Mahadevi. She was the sister of Rajaraja Chola. So she also built a lot of temples at Dadapuram, at Tirumalai, etc. And she also renovated a lot of temples. Again, you will have to maybe, there's a very nice, very good book by B. Venkatraman, which is called The Chola Queens and their contribution to temple architecture. If you read that book, you'll get all details about this. So apart from Shimbya Mahadevi, there was Kundavai, Loka Mahadevi, and I must mention, although I know I'm running out of time, I have to mention this young queen called Nangai Bhuti Aditya Pidariyar. She was also a Chola queen. She built an exquisite temple of Shiv Chandrasekhar in Tiruchendurai near Tiruchirappalli. This was in the early 10th century. So at the age of 25, she was married to the son of the Chola ruler Parantak I. So she was a little, just a little before Shimbya Mahadevi. Important thing is she was an unmarried young lady when she was paying for the construction of that Shiv Chandrasekhar temple. She only continued after she got married. She probably, maybe she got more resources or maybe she had enough resources. She merely continued. So that exquisite Shiv Chandrasekhar temple, which she started constructing as a young woman. And in that, not only did she design it, we also see remains of a workshop nearby where those statues were designed, which she took a lot of interest in, and from where the statues went to that temple. When she got married, in a public affirmation of her dedication to that temple, she donated even more. So there is this Shiv Chandrasekhar temple, which was built by Nangai Bhuti. Another important thing to remember is that Nangai Bhuti married into the Chola family, but she was from a particular family herself. What family was that? She was from, she had a natal family which had a particular style of temple building. And that style of temple building, she brought into the Cholas. Now, how do we know that there was a style of temple building of her natal family? Because her father, called Bhuti Vikram Kesari, has built a temple at Kodumbalur. Her brother Bhuti Parantakan, he built a temple at Andanalur. Her nephew Mahimalaya Irukovel, he built a temple at Kodumbalur. So this is called the Irukovel style. And she amalgamated the Irukovel and the Chola styles of temple building in this very lovely temple of Shiva Chandrasekhar at Tiruchendurai. Again, if anyone wants to read any more, there is a wonderful research done by Padma Kaimal and Vidya Dehejia on these issues. They both write in detail on the Chola queens and Chola art and Chola temple building by queens. There is also someone called Leslie Orr who has written a whole book on this. So you can read this if you want to know some more. So what are the important things that we get from this? That it was a whole tradition of the women in the family doing these things, contributing to temples, building temples, inscribing them with all the details of what they have done, bringing their, and this is also said to have been done by Shimbya Mahadevi. So there's some people, B. Venkatraman, for example, says that there's the Shimbya style. in the building of the Chola temples. Others will have you know that only it is Rajraj Chola and Rajendra Chola and only the Brihadishwar Mandir, which is the example of Chola temples, but that is perhaps not the entire story. And we are missing part of the story here. So this is as far as the Cholas are concerned. Now I think I will just end with the Guptas. So the Guptas we know very well were there in the 4th, 5th century in most parts of the country. So Chandragupta II was Samudragupta and Chandragupta II were perhaps the most important rulers and most successful rulers of this dynasty. Prabhavati Gupta was the daughter of Chandragupta II by a wife from the Naga dynasty who was called Kuber Nag. She was married into the Vakatakas. She married Rudrasen, again like Shembhya Mahadevi. She got married in 409 AD and she died. Her husband died in 405 AD. So she became a widow at a really young age. And at that time, she had 3 sons and a daughter. Then she became the regent for her sons. And for the next 14 years, she ruled the Vakataka part of the kingdom. So basically with her brother Kumargupt, this brother-sister duo kind of together ruled almost the entire country. What was her contribution to art? Now, again, remember this thing that I said about families. You must remember those beautiful coins which show Samudragupta playing the veena. So he was a very artistic person. She was the granddaughter of Samudragupta. And she is said to have really patronized the arts. She shifted her capital to Ramtek, and there are some places in MP and Maharashtra where there are remains of sculptures, of temple complexes, etc. This is in Mandhal, Ramtek, Udaygiri, Deotek. In fact, very interestingly, at Deotek, there is an inscription, not the temple. There is an inscription which says that there was a Bhagwat temple of Munda Swamin made by, there are indications that they were made by Prabhavati Gupta because Munda was the original name of Prabhavati Gupta before she got married. So she is said to have again mixed the two styles, the Gupta art style and the Vakataka art style. And at these places which I mentioned, Deotek, Udaygiri, Ramtek, Mandhal, we can find a lot of remains, some sculptures which are complete, some which are broken, but there are big complexes and there are many, many inscriptions which tell us a lot about her. So she was another person, another queen who built a lot of other temples. Now, I think I have taken really a lot of time. I could have gone into the temples built by the queens of Kashmir. Most of them, of course, you can't see any longer. And there are so many other dynasties which one can look at if one wants to know who else was making temples. Apart after the Guptas, there were the Gatawals of Kannauj, Chandelas, Kesaris, Parmars of Malwas, the Kalchuris, the Chalukyas of Gujarat. But we don't have time to go into details of all of them. I hope I have given you a taste of what I meant when I picked up the topic of queens building temples in the Bharatiya Parampara. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumedha ji. आपने बहुत बारीकी से और very pinpointedly and given us a new idea. I mean, personally, I had no idea that queen can build temples, and really you have transformed us to some extent. And the concept which these westernized concept which led us to think that men and women always in fighting mode, that is not there since time immemorial. These what is taught during our marriage, that is there since time immemorial, and that is in continuity. is a really an excellent idea, and really a knowledge which we have got. And you also very nicely told about the equal share of men and women as a member in the society for balance, a proper balance. And then आपने एक बहुत अच्छा बात बोला है कि ये जो सतीदाह प्रथा, which was in again middle I mean मध्य युगीय का बात हम लोग बोलते रहते हैं, ये a stigma कि वो सती प्रथा में जाना, और that was in place. That is totally wrong. That was again one sort of concept has been
and if I can just interrupt Dr. Chaudhary, I really wish that people who are watching this would read Dr. Meenakshi Jain's book on Sati. She brings out the myth of this overarching idea that Sati was such an important thing and all women were, becoming Sati. She brings out that myth with facts and figures so clearly. So it's a book by Dr. Meenakshi Jain called Sati.
Meenakshi Jain, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I will share this to everyone.
Yes, please do.
Sati. So then also you also given us in the same line that the even widow they have became queen and also act as a king, basically not queen. They are actually in Dito and Toto as what king used to do. As a queen, they are acting as a king, basically. So it's a really fantastic and what should I say? Is a treasure of knowledge you are possessing and given to us. Now I would like to ask each and everyone if they have any questions or doubt, or if you want to clarify, or if you want that Sumedha ji would like to extend some thought in this regard. Now I would like to ask
May I ask a question before that, please?
Yes, yes.
Somebody just wrote something about an Ahom queen. Could they repeat that, please? I would like to note it down. Somebody wrote something about an Ahom queen.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Lalji Sonari asked is that in Assam, Ahom queen Fuleshwari Devi built the great Shivadol of Shivsagar.
Fuleshwari Devi.
Yes.
Built the what was it?
Shivadol of Shivsagar.
Shivadol. Thank you. I just want to note that down. Maybe you can recommend a good book on the Ahoms for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I will request Lalji if you have questions. Aljida?
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you. You have noted my message. It is enough.
Okay. Okay. Our Professor Dilip Kumar Phukon sir, he is the president of Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Samiti Assam. He would like to say something. Yeah.
Sumedha ji, very informative lecture. We are all benefited. But I would like to add some information. In Assam, Ahom Queen Fuleshwari Kumari, as Lalji Sonari mentioned here, she built 3 temples. One is Shivadol, another is Pramateshwari or Durgadol, and third is Vishnudol at Gaurisagar in Eastern Assam. But Shivsagar, Shivadol was not, she patronized, but not directly involved. Thank you.
I would be very happy if could you give me a book to read on this?
Yeah, I will share with you, madam.
All right, thank you.
I will get all this.
There are the Sumedha ji. The best part to know is like you can go through the Ahom Burangi. So the Ahom Burangi they are the primary sources, and they can really help you a lot in that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hmm.
Ahom Buranji. Yeah, I've noted that. Thanks, Ankita.
Yeah.
Anyone would like to ask or clarify their doubt? Dr. Shashankar Shekhar Sharma ji. And Prafullo Goswami da ji. Prafullo da.
নমস্কাৰ
Namaskar.
অসমীয়াত কওঁ চৌধুৰী আপুনি ট্ৰান্সলেট কৰি দিব মেডামে এগৰাকী আনমেৰিড ষ্ট্ৰং লেডিৰ কথা কৈছে যিয়ে চন্দ্ৰশেখৰ নে কি নামটো ক'লে মই পাহৰিলোঁ মই নোটেট কৰা নহ'ল তেখেত আনমেৰিড এগৰাকী লেডি পৰৱৰ্তী সময়ত তেখেতে বিয়া হৈছে কিন্তু এই আনমেৰিড লেডিগৰাকীয়ে তেখেতৰ নিজৰ ষ্টাইল নিজৰ ভাৱনা নিজৰ কৌশল এইখিনি সদায় তেখেতে মন্দিৰ নিৰ্মাণ কৰিছিল এই এগৰাকী সৰসী লেডিয়ে ইমানখিনি চৰ্চটো কেনেকৈ পালে ইয়াৰ বিহাইণ্ড দ্য স্ক্ৰীন কিবা থাকিব পাৰে নেকি বা তেওঁৰ যিখিনি উৎকৰ্ষতা তেওঁ কৰা গুণখিনি কেনেকৈ তেওঁ আয়ত্ত কৰিলে
হয় ঠিক আছে তাৰমানে তেখেতে অলৰেডি আগতে কৈছে যে 64 বিদ্যাৰ কথা 64 বিদ্যা which were being imparted to men and women to the queen and prince and princess okay girl and boys equally agote etu eta in existence asile je সকলোৱে 64 বিদ্যা 64 vidyas are to be taught and they have that vidya which includes everything जीवनशैली में जो चीज चाहिए वो सब 64 विद्या में included है and some of the vidya they are performed one of them is sculpture designing and making
also
that
architecture not just sculpture but architecture that means
yes.
Yes, I do agree
तो प्रफुल्ल दा एक्चुअली प्रफुल्ल दा पूछा है कि वो जो अनमैरिड लेडी का बात बोला है who build this Venkata
the temple at Tiruchendurai
yeah so actually he would like to know the name of that lady once again and the temple
okay so I'll tell you the name of the lady and the temple and I will tell you the name of a lady who has written very beautifully on this so the name of the lady is Nangai Bhuti Aditya Pidariyar
Nangai Bhuti
Aditya Pidariyar and what else whose name you wanted to know the name of the temple it is the temple of Shiva Chandrasekhar at Tiruchendurai near Tiruchirappalli
Shiva Chandrasekhar okay madam thank you
she was a Chola queen and if you want to read about her in detail there is a scholar her name is Padma Kaimal
okay
she has written in great detail about Nangai Bhuti
okay madam thank you
Dr. Otul Chandra Das and Dr. Gauri De Professor Biswas, HP Biswas, Shiva Prasad Biswas. Okay. Okay. As per the this Byakhyanmala, what we do after the each and every Byakhyan, we summarize it. I mean, there is just to summarize. Then we go to our president's remark. So now I would like to request Dr. Ankita Datta
Sir,
to
sir,
summarize. Yeah.
sir,
Yeah,
sorry,
Gauravmay would
sir.
like to say something. Yes, tell me.
Sorry, sir. Sorry for the late joining of this webinar, but I found the topic very interesting. So I have a question. Since my background is from medieval phase, so ma'am has beautifully described the different temples built by the queen in the Chola period or else Gupta period. That is totally an ancient period. So, ma'am, do you find any means relations in the medieval phase right after the invasions of
Yes, yes, yes. Because these invasions did break up a lot of things, but they also, I'll tell you, in fact, let me tell you the names of some of the more contemporary ones that you are asking for, no? So
Yes.
there was something which was, there is the Bhognandishwar temple, which is in Bangalore. Okay, that is also 9th century. Then there is the Pratapeshwar temple in Kalna, West Bengal, which was built in 1849.
Okay.
So that is quite late. Then, of course, we can't forget Rani Rashomoni, because the
Yes, yes,
Dakshинeshwar
yes.
Kali Mandir,
That's what.
that was
That's
built
what.
by Rani Rashomoni in 1847 to 1855. So other than that, also we have the great example of Ahilyabai Holkar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah,
are
ma'am.
this Gauri. For this, I have collected some information, but I think we need to everywhere from all parts of the country. We have to go into details. We have to go to each village, town, and collect the names of temples which may not be there in books and articles.
Exactly, ma'am.
That's why
Ma'am,
I want to ask all of you to tell
I have
me
found
what
I have seen a temple
Hmm.
built by Rani Shiromani in
Okay,
Midnapur.
okay, okay. So you should write about it.
Yeah, ma'am, exactly. I'm going to present a paper on that.
Wonderful. Very good. What did you say the name was? Let me
Rani
also look at
Shiromani,
Rani Shiromani, and in where is it?
Midnapur, Midnapur.
Singapore.
West Bengal, Midnapur.
Okay. Because there's a lot of information gap. This is all it is a kind of developing thing. We are looking at history in a different way. All of us have to work hard to collect a lot of data and information. So please do write, and please do send it to me when you write.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Thank you,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Shashanko Shekhar Sharma ji, if you would like to say something, you just.
Thank you, ma'am, for your inspiring speech. And I want to hear more from you in near future.
Thank you,
And
Dr.
thank you.
Sharma. I am always ready to join whenever called, if time and routine permits. It's very good to talk about these and to exchange views from everywhere. So that would be very nice. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
So anyone else would like to add something? Otherwise, I will request Dr. Onkida Dotto to summarize, and then we'll go to Professor Dilip Kumar Fukan sir for his word, and then we are going to sum up. So as no one is asking any questions, I'm going to Professor Sudeshna Bhattaji was there? No, now it is not there. Okay, now I would like to request Dr. Onkita Dotto to summarize this speech.
Yes. Thank you, Sumedha ji. Thank you so much for that enlightening talk. And I think most of us today, who all of us who joined this session, most of us did not know so many of the intricate details that you mentioned within such a short period of time, and which is, I mean, that's how should be a scholar. So it was really very, very lively and very, very enlightening as well. And how like 1.5 hours it went by. We wanted to listen to you more in
My
fact, in
goodness,
the near
it's 1.5 hours. That's a long time.
yeah. Yeah, but it was very nice, and I think in the end we also had a beautiful interaction. Some few questions also came up, and a few observations about the Hibodol of Sibsagar. I mean, truly, Indian mandirs, Indian temples, they are truly exemplary for their workmanship, balance, intricacy, the sheer artistry. It is just enough to, by looking at the temple architecture, it is just enough to transport one to a higher spiritual plane of thought just by looking at them. And I was just thinking while I was listening to your speech that the sculptors who built these temples and the workmen who carved the beautiful idols, they did not just merely practice a profession to earn a living, because their profession was not divorced from their religion, because temple building itself was an expression of their devotion to a faith, to the Sanatan Parampara, which they deeply revered. But I mean, as we all know, the invaders who demolished and desecrated so many of these temples and broke their arms and legs in the medieval era. Well, anyways, without taking much of everybody's time, it's already going to be 6, and I would like to briefly summarize Sumedhaji's talk. She began her speech today on Hindu queens as temple builders in the Bharatiya Parampara by the understanding, by specifying the understanding of itihasa as not just Sankalan but as Sanshodhan. And often the sources of evidence for history as they exist, they have not been properly appreciated and also not been properly brought out, whether it be archaeological remains, textual remains such as places, inscriptions on copper plates, stones, etc., folk tradition, etc., all of that. And she talked about India as a continuing civilization, and we need to have certain new historiographical methods to reappreciate and as well as reanalyze the available evidence. And then this does not require repetition. All of us, we know that a small cabal of Marxists and feminists who have been continuously operating to distort our history writing. And the Marxist feminist framework is a conflict theory, as she said, which stands against the principle of cooperation between the Purush and the Prakriti. That is the basis of the Bharatiya civilization. And the way in which we should look at the Indic civilization is actually through the concept of Varnashram Dharma. And here she explained the fact that we need a refreshed and an updated understanding of both Varna and Ashrama, because Varna is not caste, and it has been the Western colonial mind which has interpreted Varna as caste, and there has to be a balance between the pursuit of Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. And Indian society needs to be understood through the concepts of Varnashram Dharma and Purusharth. The standard Marxist understanding has been that these were all made for men and never for women, and they have been fashioned within the term patriarchy, which itself has been borrowed from Christian theology. Our rishis who wrote our Dharma Shastras, they have clear proofs that all the 4 ashramas, they were open to both men and women equally. And therefore, we need to look back at our itihasa. By itihasa, here we mean our the Ramayana, the Mahabharata and the Puranas to understand the essence of our Bharatiya culture and civilization. She elaborated it with the examples of Sulabha, Gargi, Katyayani, Lopamudra, the dialogue between Yagnavalkya and his 2 wives, etc. And both Brahmacharya and Sannyasa ashramas were equally open to women. There is also ample evidence in our history to show that the ashrama system and the purusharthas were equally available to women. Grihasth was the most important ashram, where the Grihapati, the Grihapatni and their progeny constituted one single unit. And there has been a wrong conflation of patriarchy with a Grihasthi, where actually both the Grihapati and the Grihapatni, they function as the 2 wheels of the same chariot. And there were many roles for the Grihapatnis or the queens in the royal family. She was responsible for allocating the resources of the household among the rest of the members. She also exercised a significant influence on the affairs of the kingdom in contributing to the construction of temples, charity, etc. And even widows became queens and assumed responsibility of the household. In this context, she also explained beautifully and in detail about the education of queens in the ancient times. It was essential for everyone to be trained in the 64 arts, which were a fascinating combination of almost all the things that we can think of in our normal daily life, including dancing and singing, cooking, architecture, sculpture, and vastu. Thus, the royal queens were able to design temples, images, and sculptures. She also talked about Queen Shantala, a renowned artist, dancer, and administration. Then she discussed about the Ikshvaku queen, Shanti Siri, who had a temple built at Nagarjuna Konda, a famous Buddhist center, and Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain temples, they all existed together. The queens had donated to all kinds of temples, and as such, the sharp distinction between Hindu, Buddhism, and Jainism at this time did not exist. The Virupaksha temple, which was originally called the Lokeshwara temple at Pattadakal, it was built by Loka Mahadevi of the Chalukya dynasty to commemorate her husband's victory. Then she spoke about Trilokya Mahadevi and Loka Mahadevi, who were sisters, and somewhere down the line, these queens were moved by the same desire of temple building. And therefore, in most of the cases, we can observe that most of the temples were constructed and designed by queens of the same family. The Chalukya of Bengi, the Rashtrakuts, etc. They were the temples constructed by these dynasties. They were all a mix of Hindu and Jain temples. Then she talked about the Bhomkaras of Orissa, which was a completely new revelation, I think, for all of us. The Bhomkaras of Orissa, who were a very different kind of reigning family, and they boasted of 6 important queens. And according to the inscriptions that we have today, the Bhomkaras contributed towards the construction of a number of temples and also gave grants to several of them. Tribhuvan Mahadevi, the Bhomkara queen, she even gave money to an ordinary woman to build a temple in the memory of her husband. Madhaveshwar Dev temple in Orissa was built by Madhav Devi, the queen of Sudhakar Dev. They achieved their ideas of charity, piousness, and moksha through their provision of grants to different temples. Then Jain queens such as Shantala Devi, whose husband Vishnuvardhan later became a Hindu, she also spoke about this queen who contributed tremendously towards the building of Hindu temples. Then Rudrama Devi of the Kakatiya dynasty, who was also a very important temple builder and giver of grants for temples. She then spoke about the Pallavas of Kanchi, famous for the construction of the Narasimha Varman temple and the Kailashnath temple. The Kailashnathar temple at Kanchipuram was built by a queen of Narasimha Varman. She then talked about the Cholas, whose queens were also great contributors to temple building. Shimdiya Mahadevi renovated old temples into new ones and also built new temples. She also built new statues and images, and Shimdiya Mahadevi was instrumental in designing and making of bronze statues and bronze portraits. Then Queen Nangai Bhuti, who married into a Chola family, built the exquisite Shiv Chandrasekhara temple, which was a mixture of her own distinctive styles of temple architecture that was followed in her own family tradition and the Chola temple architecture. And at last, she talked about the Gupta queen, Prabhavati Gupta, who married Rudra Sen of the Vakataka dynasty. With her brother Kumara Gupta, they ruled almost the entire country. She mixed the two styles of architecture. One was the Gupta style and the other was the Vakataka style in the art of temple construction. Then she also spoke briefly about the Gahadabalas of Kannauj, the Chalukyas of Gujarat, and the different queens of Kashmir, in brief, who constructed several beautiful temples across different places of the country. I think we did not want this discussion to end. We all wanted to hear more. So let's keep it for the future. We would all like to hear from you again. Thank you so much, Sumedha ji, for giving us your time and efforts. So we are really indebted to you.
Ankita, also
Thank you
for
so
that
much.
very good summing up. You just picked up all the important points and put it there. Thank you to everyone for listening to this, for being part of this dialogue. Thank you for inviting me. It was a very enlivening experience. I have also learned something, and I hope to be able to deepen my research on Assam with the help of Ankita and with the help of other people who are here. There's a lot of work to be done. And there's so much also in local languages which is not accessible to people who don't know that language.
Yeah.
So this is
Even
a kind
the Buranjis actually, and the Ahom Buranjis, mainly the Tunkhumya Buranji has many such things, but then some of them are then translated, some of them are not translated. So
yes, so there's a lot of work for all of us.
Local languages have these problems. Yeah.
Thank you very much for
it was really nice listening to you, and we look ahead for more such sessions with you in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much once again to you and Dr. Ankita ji and Dr. Madam Sumedha Verma Ojha ji. We have really a enlightening and very informative, knowledgeable person, and I hope that Itihas Sankalan Samiti Assam will again invite you, and we'll make a series of talk. And as you rightly mentioned, Itihas Sankalan Samiti has a wing to translate these in 3 languages. One is what is there in our Assamese language, and from them to Hindi and English. And likewise, so many books are there in English.
Dr. Chaudhary, if you would put me in touch with that translation unit, I would be very happy.
Yeah. We are just
put me in touch with them.
So we are also translating from English to Hindi and Hindi to Assamese as well. So that we can cover to some extent, we can disseminate that knowledge. It is very important on our part. But as you said, that lot of words, but people are less to work. That is also harsh truth.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. With this, now I would like to request Professor Dilip Kumar Phukon sir to put his presidential remark. Over to Professor Dilip Kumar Phukon sir.
Thank you. Very informative and inspiring lecture from Sumedha ji. We hope that we will get a cooperation in the future, and our Secretary General will contact with you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Lord. And Ankita is always with us. Subhajit is always work as Sutradhar in Sanskrit, Sutradhar, and he will make forward this Byakhyanmala in the future. And thanks to all participants. Thanks again.
So thank you, Professor Dilip Kumar Phukon sir, and I hope with his blessings and with the blessings of Sumedha ji also, and with the blessings of everyone who are elderly to me, and with the blessings of Ma Kamakha, because we are from the land of Ma Kamakha. So now we are going to have Mangal Mantra and to conclude this session. So may I request all of you to just join your hand and then we can start. I will say the first line, then you follow that way. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah.
Sarve Shantu Niramaya. Sarve Bhadrani Pashantu.
Sarve Bhadrani Pashantu.
Ma Kashi Dukha Bhag Bhavet.
Ma Kashi Dukha Bhag Bhavet.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Modhureno Samapoyet.
Namaskar.
আদরীয় প্রণাম।
Namaskar.
Modhureno Samapoyet.